Hello again, everybody. Welcome back. Thank you for sticking with us through the day today. And I hope as well, if you are watching this on the day itself on Thursday, you'll be joining us for our 4 o'clock Zoom call later on. So this is where everybody in the class is invited, whether you're at home or have been at school through the day. We're all invited. It's 4 o'clock Zoom call. If you're not sure about that, ask mum and dad. They will have been emailed the link so they can double check how to access that. We're going to be thinking this afternoon about history, and obviously we're going to be continuing our learning all about our Victorian topic. And we're going to be thinking today about something really crucial to many of the people in Victorian Britain. This was really central to a lot of people's lives. And they were things called workhouses. Now, I wonder if you know anything about these already. You might have sort of done a little bit of research of your own. You might have heard something about it in a story or a book. If you do know anything about it, maybe pause the video here and just have a quick chat about that at home. Maybe there's something you know already, or maybe you can infer something from the pictures we've got on the screen here. Okay, so workhouses. First thing to say, we know people in the Victorian times were often fairly poor. There wasn't a lot of money sloshing about in the Victorian times, and although some people were very, very, very rich, the vast majority of people did not have a huge amount of money and were struggling to get by. And this was a bit of a problem for the government, because when people are poor, it means there's beggars on the streets, it means the government needs to pay money to look after them, it means, bad times in society. And so the government got their thinking caps on. They thought, a lot of very poor people in the country at the moment. And they, bashed a few heads together and thought of making the Poor Law. That was its name, the Poor Law. And this was made in 1834. I should say, by the way, we are going to be making notes on workhouses along the way. And the reason we're making notes on workhouses is we are going to be doing some writing about workhouses over the next week or so. So what I'd like to do today, while we're listening and watching and finding out all about workhouses, if you can get a piece of paper and a pen and just make some notes along the way. If you hear like an interesting fact or something you think would be exciting to write about or interesting to write about, just make a quick note of it. And then hopefully you're going to end this session with a little page of notes that you can use when we come to do our literacy work involving workhouses later on. I think it'll be next week now. So yeah, while we're doing today's video, if you could make some notes about workhouses, that would be fantastic, because next week you are going to be writing your next diary entry from the point of view of your Victorian character when you are at the workhouse. So bear that in mind. So yeah, the government at the time made this thing called the Poor Law, and it said that local councils had to, by law, look after poor people. It said that local councils and governments had to give out food, they needed to give people somewhere to live, and they needed to work in order to earn it. I mean, it's sounding good, isn't it? It's like they're like the Marcus Rashford of the day. They're making sure poor people are fed, they're making sure they've got somewhere to live. This all sounds great, doesn't it? Workhouses were where poor people who had no job or home lived. So if you weren't able to put a roof over your own head, if you couldn't afford rent or to buy a house, you lived at the workhouse. And they earned their stay, they sort of paid for their stay, if you like, by doing jobs at the workhouse. Other people that lived in the workhouse were orphaned children, and that means children that didn't have any parents. That was actually a reasonable number in the Victorian times, because people did die younger, and so some people's parents did die. It would be abandoned children that lived there. So some children, if mum and dad couldn't afford to feed the children, they would sometimes give up the children, they would abandon the children, and the children would go and live in the workhouse. If you were physically or mentally ill, you went to the workhouse. If you were disabled, you went to the workhouse. If you were very old and couldn't afford to live, now you'd stopped working, workhouse for you. If you were an unmarried mother, workhouse. So lots and lots of people lived at the workhouse. Now I'm going to give you a big list of all the exciting things that the workhouse provided and had. And this is going to sound like an amazing place, because It gave people a place to live, a place to work, a place to get some medical care, a place to get food. They got clothes there. Children got education. There was a sort of school there. They got training for a job. There was all sorts of people that worked there. There was a master, a matron, a medical officer, a chaplain, that's a religious person, a porter, a school teacher. That was really exciting for children. And look at all these amazing rooms and things that were on site as well. There was a dining hall, there were dormitories for sleeping, there was a kitchen, there were schoolrooms, nurseries, rooms for the sick, a chapel, a bakery, a laundry, tailors for making clothes, shoemakers, vegetable gardens, and a small farm. Doesn't this sound like a great place, right? It's like a 5-star hotel, isn't it? Wrong. Very, very wrong. Workhouses were not great places to be, and in fact, they were feared by the poor. If you didn't have any money, you would be terrified of being sent to the workhouse. These weren't optional places where you could go, you were sent there. This actually was a bit more like a prison than somewhere you chose to go. So the government, part of their reason for doing this was they didn't want to encourage idlers. It's a good word, that might be a good word for our writing, actually. We might call people idlers maybe. And that was a word that meant kind of lazy people that didn't have jobs and didn't work. And the government wanted basically to make these people really scared. And they wanted to scare people out of staying at home and not working. They wanted people to be so scared of the workhouse that they would do anything to keep out of it. So they would go and take on extra jobs, they would do all sorts, they would do anything they could to keep out of it. And it was kind of designed, actually, the workhouse, to be this horrible, scary place that people were worried and scared about going to. So how did they make it such a scary place? How did they make it such an unappealing place? Well, when you got there, women, children, and men were all split up. That meant mums and dads separated, sent to different parts of the workhouse to do different jobs and different things. If you were a young child and you were sent there maybe with mum or dad, separated. Again, you wouldn't have seen your family even if they were at the same workhouse as you. You would even be punished if you were going past each other in a corridor and tried to speak to one another. What a horrible situation. Can you imagine? Even like, you were sent there maybe with your mum, you weren't even allowed to speak to her if you passed her in the corridor, and you certainly weren't allowed to stay in the same room as her. The education the children did receive wasn't on the kind of two most important things, maybe reading, writing, maths, those things that we kind of know and consider to be really important. It would actually have been some quite dull stuff, and it would have been mainly based around actually how they could do some more work. If you were sent to the workhouse, you did get given clothes, but really it was more like a uniform. And actually, that's the same in prisons. You get there, yes, you get given clothes, but it's a prison uniform, so it's not very nice. And it worked in very much the same way here. You were given a workhouse uniform. And that meant that everyone looked the same, and everyone outside knew that you were poor and that you lived in a workhouse. When you entered the workhouse, you were stripped and bathed. The food you were given was tasteless, and the same day after day after day. You might be familiar with a very, very common story, or a very popular story set in the Victorian times, called Oliver Twist. And you might be familiar with a very famous scene where he goes up, he's hungry and his stomach's gurgling, and he's really, really desperate for some more food. And he takes his little bowl up to the front and he says, "Please, sir, can I have some more?" And it's because he's so hungry, because the workhouse there weren't feeding him much. The workhouse owners wanted to keep costs down as much as possible. And so rather than giving people lots and lots of lovely food, they gave them just enough food to stay alive. Sounds a bit familiar to something I've seen in the news this week, actually. So the food was really, really tasteless. It was the same day after day, not a very nice place to be. The young and old, as well as men and women, were made to work hard and often do really unpleasant jobs. So it wasn't that you got to do a really fun, nice job that you really wanted to do. They often had really, really boring, dull jobs, and we'll see some of those in a minute. Children could also find themselves hired out or even sold to work in factories or mines. So if there was a factory owner that really needed someone to come, I don't know, maybe sort of sweep the floor of his factory, and he wanted to get someone in really, really cheaply to come and do it, he might go to a workhouse and buy one of the children in there. Can you imagine getting sold to some factory owner that wanted you to work for no money? Awful times. So really, really awful place to be. Horrible situation. I've got a couple of really fantastic videos here, which as usual, I'm going to put a link in the description for you. So you will be able to go down here and watch the link to these videos. They are really, really fantastic clips that the BBC has put together. I should just make really clear, they are not film from the Victorian era. They're not real life footage. These are a dramatisation. So these were filmed in the modern day, but meant to kind of act and look as though it's the Victorian times. There's one video here with a kind of workhouse chef talking about what they ate. There is another video here about what it was like for children. There's a kind of spoof video diary here from someone that lives in the workhouse saying what it's like to be there. And there's also another fantastic video here from the same thing against a sort of dramatized clip about the work that they did there. And you'll find out a little bit more about the horrible jobs that they did in the workhouse. So a couple of really fantastic clips there that I'd really, really recommend watching. So do follow the link in the description. And while you're watching those clips, same as we've been doing, you can definitely make some notes on those and write down any interesting things you find out, any kind of useful information that you think, yeah, I'm going to put that in my workhouse diary, which we'll be writing in literacy next week. So what an awful time, eh? Really, really horrible place to be. If you were a Victorian, I was about to say Victorian child, but of course also adults as well, adults without jobs. If you were an adult or a child in the Victorian times, you did not want to get sent to the workhouse under any circumstances. This was used as a bit of a kind of fear tactic by the people in charge during the Victorian era. I know that many workhouses were actually built on top of hills so that the policemen in the cities could point at workhouses, and you know, if it was built on top of a hill, often it would be visible from all around the city, and they would go, "Oi, you! If you don't sort yourself out, you'll be up in the workhouse." So horrible, horrible places to be. You did not want to end up in the workhouse. Okay, fantastic. Thank you for joining me for this afternoon's video. As I said, hopefully I'll see you on the Zoom call at 4 o'clock if you're watching this on Thursday. But whether I see you or not, have a fantastic rest of the day. I hope you've enjoyed yourself. See you soon. Bye.